Hello and welcome to the show, Paranormal Fact or Fiction, the only show anywhere in the world that looks to discover the mystery from the history, the urban myth from the urban myth.
I'm Wesley Johnson. Every week I will pick a famous haunted location. I will recall all the stories and information the internet has to offer, and we will determine if it's fact or fiction.
I will then use my own extensive research historically of all of the buildings that we look at and the paranormal investigations I've done in those buildings with my team, the International Paranormal Society. We also have a bell with us, a bunk bell. If we press the bell, it is bunk. So we'll be keeping scores throughout the course of the show. So what property do you have for us today, Wesley?
This week we're going to talk about the famous Mounds Theater. Mounds Theater, according to this, originally built in 1922 as a venue for silent film and entertainment.
That is 100% true. It was built in 1922. It was rebuilt and remodeled in a fabulous Art Deco manner several years later, of course. But I've investigated this building many times. I actually did a week-long investigation.
Really?
The fabulous thing about theatres is you can set your equipment up, and if they're only showing a film or a play at the end of the week, you've got the whole week in there to play and mess around and to leave your equipment out and to have controlled areas. So I think I've investigated this property about 50 to 60 times. I actually had the keys to the front door on one occasion. The owner was a fabulous lady.
And she trusted you.
She was very generous. There wasn't much in there to steal, to be fair. You've got, unless you want some chairs or some sets from the stage productions. But I did have the front key at one time and I could kind of come and go. And we did tours. I still think they do ghost tours there and they do paranormal investigations because it is a non-profit organisation and they raise money. I actually filmed in there as well for a sequence we did on Eyewitness News and they keep repeating it every year. So I filmed this about 12 years ago and then I get a phone call or a text message and people say, "You're at the Mounds Theatre." I'm like, a long time ago I was, but they keep repeating.
I'm in my living room.
The Eyewitness, that is true. I had to look around and see, this is not a theatre. What I like about theatres, what I like about investigating in all these old cinemas and theatres is there's an energy. It's almost reverential in the energy. It's this kind of energy you only experience in a theatre or a cathedral. You know, that you get 700 people in the Mounds Theatre back in the day.
Right.
In actuality, there's less people now because back in the day, people were a lot shorter and smaller. So if you look at the attendances...
Obesity.
Exactly. That's true enough. So they had to change all of the seating. So there's less people in there now, but originally 700. But if you think about the energy of all of that building, if you've always wanted to appear on the stage, I'm guessing by your outfit that you've always wanted to be a rock star. You're imagining yourself currently singing for AC/DC.
Tattoos gave it away.
Yeah, you're singing Thunderstruck. If you've always wanted to do that, you can do that when you're dead. You can be on the stage and pretend you're in X Factor. You can be an actor. You can be a singer. So many ghosts haunt theatres because they had the dream when they was alive that they wanted to be on the stage. And you can almost imagine the ghosts having a little play or having on some
that
production.
dream wouldn't necessarily die in death.
Absolutely. And if you think about the history of cinemas, there are some urban legends that you're supposed to leave a stage light on 24/7 on the stage so the ghosts can do their plays and put on their productions. But in actuality, that's an early health and safety warning because they don't want people to walk off the stage and into the orchestra pit if it's really dark. Wouldn't be the way to go, would it? So they have put that in place.
The other was a better narrative, though. Better story.
Well, the actors also wanted Monday off. And they said that was the time the ghosts would perform their plays. But back in the day, it was a good excuse for actors not to go into work on Monday if they'd been working hard all weekend. But if you think about the energy that you need for a haunting, it's got everything. You had children messing around and running about in the 1930s and 40s in this cinema. They're watching Flash Gordon and Buster Crabbe and Buck Rogers, and they're throwing jujus at one another. You know, your great-grandparents probably made out in the back row in the 1920s. You have everyone laughing at the same time, everyone scared and jumping at the same time, which you don't get with modern multiplexes.
Not at the same level.
You know, you would turn up and there'd be 3 other people in this warehouse of a building. You've been to films where you're the only person sat there or there's 3 people.
Yeah.
You don't get that collective sense of humanity anymore.
No.
So for all of these
Unless
reasons,
you're at the Avengers Endgame on premiere night. That's a different story.
that would be a different
But
story.
yes, I know what you mean.
I don't get invited to such things. I have to be in bed by 8 o'clock with hot chocolate. That's never going to happen for me.
With your tea?
So, for all of these reasons, this makes cinemas and theatres in general very haunted. So
Active.
you're going to get the most activity. But I've written about this in my book, Mysterious Minnesota. You're going to do this without
Let's
dropping
do it.
the
We're
book?
going to. This is a thing.
Yep, I believe it's the third
Yes,
chapter of that book. I've done all the historical research. I've investigated it 50, 60 times. I should know the difference between bunk and fact as we go along here. So it puts me in a good place.
Okay.
So what have you got? What have you...
Just one little tidbit. So it says that this building was actually used as a warehouse until 2001. No other reference of time at all. Just a
warehouse.
Straightforward. Oh, I guess it was a warehouse up until a few years ago.
In 1967, films were beginning to wane. People were getting disposable incomes that they could watch television.
Sure.
They could have records and vinyl, very popular, of course, in the 1960s. Disposable income. Teenagers didn't want to go to the cinema because that's what their parents did.
Yeah.
So in the 1960s, there was a slump generally around the world in going to the cinema. So it couldn't make enough money. It did close in 1967, and it did become a warehouse. They kept old computers and various bits and pieces in there. That is true.
So not fake, but safe assumption that after all the theater business is when it became a warehouse.
1967.
Not, sorry, actually wasn't a theater at all. It's just a warehouse.
Yes. Oh, I'll rest my popcorn on this crate while I'm watching a show. How would that be?
We will give it a tick for the fact.
The craziest thing I've ever heard in a cinema, by the way, was I went to a showing of Planet of the Apes. Do you remember that film?
I remember.
At the very end, Charlton Heston's on the beach. He sees the Statue of Liberty, which I'm surprised you didn't bring with you and put behind you here.
Yeah.
Quite a collection of Americana you have going on there.
The only Statue of Liberty we need is Hulk Hogan, baby.
Yes.
Just kidding, Mama.
So, I'm in the cinema. You see the Statue of Liberty appear. It's a very iconic, dystopic scene.
Yeah.
And a guy behind me shouts out, "How did that get there?" And I thought that was the funniest thing I've ever heard.
That's amazing,
Yeah, he just wasted the last 2 hours of his life not knowing what was going on. He thought it was a film about monkeys, apparently. So yes, it was a warehouse, and it was reopened as the Mounds Theatre again in 2003. A very kind gentleman philanthropically gave it to the lady. She just asked him and said, "Can I have this theatre?" And he said, "Okay." And it started from there onwards.
Okay. Well, let's dive a little bit. We talk about urban legends.
Yes.
We have a lot of talk of a man named Red, who apparently was the projectionist who spent most of his life working the booth during the theater's initial run from 1922 to 1967.
That's a long run to be working in a projection booth, isn't it?
I would say, yes.
That is semi-true. I am going to ring the bunk bell.
We got a bell.
But there are elements of truth in that. There was a projectionist that worked there. His name was Red Hoffmeyer.
Okay.
I sat on the stage, I ran the ghost box, and a gentleman came through and said his name was Red, and that was the first time anyone had had contact with him. The owner then said, "Yes, I believe that's the guy that works in the projection booth." Now, being a historian, I like research. I like to back everything up with facts. I found...
Not just what you find on the internet.
Surprisingly enough, the stuff you find on the internet, probably stuff written about you as well, I would suggest, probably isn't true. I found two elderly gentlemen that used to work there and used to attend that theatre back in the 1960s. And they said, yes, there was a gentleman here named Red. Obviously, he wasn't there in the 20s and 30s. The guy would be very old. He fancied a lady. Does it mention what Red did?
It does, yeah. It elaborates on Red. It says one of the legends is he had a crush on a lady moviegoer, which ultimately prompted him to jump from the balcony to the aisle in an effort to impress her, and didn't die, but broke his leg.
Okay. We do some strange and bizarre things to impress women, right? I don't believe. I talked to two gentlemen that actually knew him and were friends with him, and they said he was horsing around. So he decided to jump from the balcony, and he did, in fact, break his leg. I don't think there was a woman involved. I think it was just a bunch of lads messing around. So I'm gonna
bunk
a bit of bunkage there, just a small element of bunkage.
The internet is off to a rough start this week, I'm gonna say.
Yes, but all's to play for.
Yeah.
So I don't think there was a woman involved, but there was definitely a gentleman named Red Hoffmeyer. I've spoken to him many times.
Yeah.
He wasn't a big fan of the ladies, actually. Does it go on to mention?
It does. Yeah. You're on the ball here. So it says Red had a very gruff voice, was known for swearing a lot, and apparently was quite the groper.
So just a Minnesotan, really, is what we're discussing here, isn't it?
That's my thought.
He has
Jeez,
touched.
Dad.
I've spent many a lonely hour in the projection booth. By the way, the projection booth is a unique part of the building. It's got really thick walls. It's got a big sort of 4 or 5 inch door. If you go back to the 1920s, they're using open arc lighting and incredibly flammable silver nitrate film. So many a projection booth used to go up in flames, and there's been some huge deaths in the history of America. One in Chicago in particular killed almost 1,000 people because they couldn't get out of the cinema and the whole place went up. So they make projection booths airtight, so the fire's contained within that environment. But that's a great environment to do a paranormal investigation in.
Absolutely.
It's very quiet. You've got lots of EMF from the equipment that's now in there. One of the interesting things, while I remember it, about investigating the projection booth is I ran a DVR and I just left my digital voice recorder on the table and went to investigate another part of the building. When I played it back in the evidence review, I heard the sound of a coin hitting the floor. So imagine you've got a dime and you drop it on the floor and you hear that sound. And it was a residual haunting. I did some research and found out that each film back in the day required a change of 6 to 7 reels. And so what would happen is that the projectionist would have to sit and watch the film, and then he would sync it up so the next reel came along. So what he could do is have a cup of tea, read a magazine. He would push a coin into the end of the reel in the spool, and as the spool went round, the coin would drop. He would know he had a couple of minutes left to change the spool over, and he didn't have to focus on the film that he's probably seen thousands of times.
Sounds kind of like a British thing.
Do you think so? I'm sure they did that in America.
Maybe.
But ultimately, that was a residual haunting.
More
but
research
yes,
to be done.
I had female investigators on my team, and he did get a bit handsy. But what you've got to remember, I'm not excusing the gentleman, but what you have to remember is sometimes we're investigating ghosts and spirits from another era that have a different way of thinking and a different way of being. And one example of that was I went to investigate Fort Snelling. Every child in Minnesota has been to Fort Snelling on a school trip, right? It was built in the 1820s to stop the British from coming down from Canada and reclaiming the Americas.
Stay in Canada.
I guess exactly where we are, because you're paying, for your healthcare, your education, and twice as much taxes. So I don't think it necessarily worked out for you that well. But I admire your assiduity. I walked through the gates of Fort Snelling as a Brit, and again, I got some rough comments from the ghosts and spirits that were still on duty there, and saw me as the enemy, really. So you've got to remember, I'm not excusing him, but perhaps the way of being around women back in the day has changed to how it is now. But yes, he was gropey, he was handsy, people were being touched, and I did record the F word several times in the projection booth. He does exist. I've met people that knew him, that used to hang out with him, and that is true.
So we can say Uncle Red's actions are true, and we'll put that as a point for the internet.
Nice. I've had many a conversation with him. True enough.
All right. Well, let's move on here. So we got a couple other legends or accounts of paranormal. One involving a young woman wearing a pink dress that has been known to bounce a ball on the stage. I've read this on a couple different places.
Yes.
Doesn't really elaborate much more on that. Just the girl who bounces the ball on the stage.
That is true. I've been in the building. You could be in the lobby setting up your equipment or in other parts of the building, and you will hear that slapping of a ball on the stage, and you go out there and there's nothing there. I took a film crew with me, and we actually set a ball up. It was a trigger object. And we set it up on the stage, and we had thermal imaging cameras. And I said to the girl, if you wish to play with the ball, you can make the temperature go down. And we watched the temperature drop by 15 degrees in the course of a couple of minutes. And I then asked her to step away, and you see the temperature rise again. But I have audio. We left a lot of equipment running. As I said, I got a week initially to investigate the whole of that building. And by leaving recorders just there, I guess there could have been someone behind the back of the building with a a baseball or a basketball messing around. But I did get audio evidence of a ball slapping against the stage, and there was an interaction with a ball as a trigger object. So again, it pains me to say this, but that is true.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. We'll put another one. The internet.
We need some bunk. We need some
We
fake.
need some more bunk. The internet is coming back. Things are just more credible, I guess, these days. I want to talk a little bit about an individual named George Hardenberg. So, according to this source here, an eccentric old man, loves tinkering with machines. At one point, filled the theater with vintage pipe organ parts. Maybe when it was a warehouse.
This was the philanthropic man who actually gave the theatre. This is the key in life. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
And the lady looked at the theatre and said, "Can I have it?" And he said, "Sure." She said, "I wanted to make this a non-profit organisation." I'm not sure about the gentleman's organ parts. Okay. Perhaps we'll breeze over that.
Interesting little tidbit of information.
But I have no idea what he was storing in there. I thought he was storing computer parts. The photographs I saw from the 1980s looked like those old computers. Do you remember? You're too young. Do you remember the black screen and the green writing?
Oh, yeah.
And all? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It looked like that sort of
I
stuff.
think I've seen it in an old program or something.
Wow. I see what we're doing here. Okay. Yes.
It also says that he was a librarian and once served as a Ramsey County commissioner. I don't know if
He was a very wealthy gentleman, so I don't know about his background in terms of his job, but that wouldn't surprise me. I can't commit to that.
Say one way or the other. We'll just we'll leave that one as a
semi.
Yeah.
A kind of.
Yeah.
I'm in there. I'm on it, but I'm not quite. How dare you touch my bell? I've had this conversation with you. You need to ask.
I guess we have discussed that the bell is off limits to the American.
That's right. I can't. But you're not paying any attention, are you? There are no rules.
Well, you got to think. You got to explain things at least 10 different times.
This isn't Vietnam. There's rules. Good times.
Let's move on from George. Let's see.
There's a lot of
just
information. Let's jump to shadow people. There must be stuff there to do with shadow people.
We do have, so the rest of it's pretty much all accounts of activity. So yes, shadow people.
Let's start with the ghost. There is a lot of shadow play and a lot of shadow figures in that building. You'll see them out of the corner of your eye. The owner of the property back in the day was making some posters up in the lobby, and she said she was surrounded by shadow figures. But having discussed at the beginning of this episode the fact that how many people would go out of a lobby of a theatre if it was opened in 1922? It must go into the hundreds of thousands, and you have that traction, that
was
locomotion.
the thing to do.
Well, it was also a soup kitchen during the Depression. So they opened it up for a soup kitchen to feed the poor population that had no work and no money. So you have that social element as well during that period of history. So all those things are accounted for. I think that shadow people are ghosts and spirits that don't have enough energy to manifest themselves.
Yeah.
So when you see that shadow figure, it can't properly present all of the colours. And I have some evidence of that in this building. But energy dissipates. To be a ghost or a spirit, to move things around. Look, I'm touching the bell and you're going to have to look at me. You need energy to do that.
Yeah.
And so energy dissipates over a period of time. It's not a constant stream. Right. At some point it's going to disappear. And any basic physics will tell you that. So I think every time a spirit slams a door, every time it turns on a faucet, every time it flicks your ear, that requires energy. And over a period of time that will disappear. If energy doesn't disappear in spirits, we've been around on this planet for 600,000 years, yet I've never seen a caveman or a Neanderthal as a ghost. I've only seen ghosts in a very slim line, a thin slither of history, and not much before the sort of 1850s, to be honest. So I do think energy dissipates, and I think those shadow people are ghosts and spirits that don't have the energy to fully manifest themselves.
And I think it's interesting for people at home who maybe aren't as privy to the paranormal talk. I've always associated shadow people with more of a demonic presence, but you're saying that there are different levels of what we call shadow people.
I've never attached that to them. I've never had a shadow person or a shadow figure, and all I've got is my own experiences, of course. Yeah. But I've never had a shadow figure give me anything negative or anything dark. It just happens to, I see it, or it happens to be there or recorded. Yeah. Nothing dark. I have come across dark and demonic entities, and that's for another show, and you instantly know what they are. You get the smell,
you can feel it,
you get a knot in your stomach. We're human beings, and we know something's not quite right.
Instinct.
Going back to when we were cavemen, we have this instinct to stay alive. So when we was in the woods, we know someone's watching us because that kept us alive. So that must work even now, because we're sitting here having this conversation, and as I look around, I don't see any saber-toothed tigers. So we are winning at this game. But one of my investigators was standing in the lobby looking through his equipment case, and he looked up, and there was a gentleman standing in front of him that was wearing 1930s attire with the trilby hat and the suit. And he said he was only in 2 dimensions. He looked flat, almost like a cutout, like you'd get Hulk Hogan in a cutout. And he ran 2 blocks. He was that scared. But the fact that when he came back and told me about it, when we were then having a plenary and a discussion, he said it was in 2 dimensions and he was very faded and very sepia looking. And that would back up the fact that you're starting to lose some energy. So yes, I would agree with all those. Lots of shadow figures, lots of shadow play in the Mounds Theatre, seen by the owner and all members of my team.
So we can safely say that is a win for the internet.
That's a win for the internet. Again, I'm wanting to use the bell. I feel it's redundant.
Yeah. I kind of just, the bell needs
Stop
its
touching
moment.
the bell. What's
I
wrong with you?
didn't
Look,
touch
this
it.
is
I got
so
close.
Wow.
I can get close.
Unbelievable. There are rules.
We're going to have to discuss those again off camera.
I'll let you have a go at the end. How's that?
So in the same vein of shadow figures, also lots of accounts of poltergeist activity.
Yeah, that
Could
is.
you maybe explain again for people who don't know, little tidbit on what that means, and then your take on,
Sure.
Is there poltergeist activity at this place?
Yes, there is. Poltergeist is just energy. I'm not sure there's an intelligence attached to that. With a residual haunting or an intelligent haunting, there's a sense of intelligence, a sense of interaction. I think a poltergeist would almost be like a battery. It's just a sense of energy.
Yep.
You can't have a discussion with a battery. It's not sentient.
You could, but that'd be awfully American of you.
And there'd be lots of phone calls made to the medical profession as well at some point, I'm sure. If your best friend was a AA Duracell, we have problems. Ultimately, they do throw things around. I was in the basement, pitch black, because it's a bunker, a coal bunker.
Yeah.
And I heard a stone drop on the floor. And this bunker, this basement, is all concrete. There's no stones. It's not like the field rocks of some of the older buildings. I turned the lights on and there was a stone, a large stone, sitting on the floor in front of me that just appeared. It couldn't have come from anywhere. I put it in my pocket and carried on the investigation. I forgot it was there. I then went home that evening, and you'll know yourself as a paranormal investigator that 4 o'clock in the morning, I suddenly fall asleep on the bed, fully clothed. I wake up at 12 o'clock the next day with the pillow stuck to my face, lots of dribble.
Yeah.
I woke up, I went into my lounge, my front room, and every potted plant in my house was gathered in a pyramid in the front room. And I think it was the stone I brought home with me from the Mounds Theatre and that
brought that energy
poltergeist
into your house.
activity. Now in Britain, we wouldn't say potted plant. I've learnt the hard way.
I learned something.
Right, I would say it's a pot plant, right? So when I used to give my talks and lectures all around the country, I would tell this anecdote and story, and members of my team would be giggling and laughing in the background, and they didn't tell me for 2 years that when I said pot plant, all Americans thought I'd be growing pot. They didn't correct me and say it's actually a potted plant is what you need.
It just goes to show, with all the information you've gotten, you can always learn something.
Absolutely.
We do have some terms.
We leave with more than we arrive with.
Yeah.
Is what we are. Also, people just thought I was a liberal, laid-back European, and that was to be accepted. Of course, he's got pot plants.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he? He's British.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The last, I would say, big. Well, first of all, it's the poltergeist. That's another win for the
true,
internet.
Yeah, I want to ring the bell. Perhaps we need a bell for.
Maybe that's something we're going to have to work in the
gong.
future. Like,
some sort of gong would be
gong.
useful, wouldn't it?
That's a good idea.
We can differentiate between bell and gong at that point.
We have an account of the 1950s where apparently there was a murder of a young child. Not a lot of detail, but something worth noting. Figured you could elaborate.
They found a small child's shoe with a little buckle on in the basement when they were clearing it out of that coal bunker. Okay. They then attached to that a story that children were being abducted in the 50s and 60s, and perhaps the child was murdered and killed on the site. There's a small child's shoe or clothing everywhere. You have children. Yeah. How many shoes, gloves and scarves have you lost over the years, right?
Many.
So on the back of that, they've attached a murder to that. I spoke to a gentleman who was high up in the police department, who was a retired police officer, who was actually investigating in Minnesota in the 1960s, the 1950s, and says he has no recollection of that case. And I have looked extensively, done historical research, and I have found no abductions of children in that area, which is East Side St. Paul. So all they've got is the shoe, which could have come from anywhere, and then they've elaborated on that and said that a child was murdered or abducted. I found no historical research for that. That I believe, I'm going to commit myself to that. If anyone has,
you had a lot of excitement behind that. I mean, that reverberated around the whole room.
Well, I'm going to have to sit down with a cigarette now and have a rest for 5 minutes. I've shot my bolt at that point.
Tick for the fiction. I like it. Well, you know, as satisfying as that was, I'm going to have to say I think the internet still took this round.
What are the scores? What have we got?
So let's do the final tally here. So we have 5 definite facts from the internet with 3 confirmed fiction. So 5 fact, 3 fiction. The internet wins again. Come on, people.
Well, I'm going to jump in.
Put out more shit.
Well, I'm sure they're doing this as we speak. One more thing I want to bring up. We did a big event while we were there. And Chris Fleming, who's a very famous paranormal investigator from the television, we did an event. There was guests that came with us. There was a lady who was an undertaker. So this woman never had any drama in her life. She was very laid back, the sort of person you would want to be a paranormal investigator. She always said, she mentioned this to me, she said she's never had a paranormal experience, she always wanted one. Well, you need to be careful what you wish for, because she was in the basement with a team and Chris Fleming was there, and she had a big jacket on. It was Minnesota, it was January. There's a
winter all the time.
Winter all the time. There is a phenomenon that I've never come across investigating anywhere in the world that's unique to Minnesota, and it's called the Minnesota sniff. So we're all sitting doing a paranormal investigation. I would say, is anybody there? And you would hear, because someone's sniffing, it's cold.
Yeah.
A week later, when I go back and listen to the evidence and I say, is anyone there? That sniff suddenly sounds like, get out. So there is a thing called the Minnesota sniff, but she claimed she felt something on her back. So she lifted up her ski jacket and she was clawed in talon marks in the basement of the Mounds Theatre from the spine outwards in 3s on her back. She couldn't have done that herself. In 3s. Now,
so it's even a little mocking of the Trinity there.
I will ring the bell just for you, sir. You have surprised me with your knowledge and wisdom. If we were doing this long enough, it was bound to happen, of course. But that's spot on. I shall give you points for that. Perhaps we should keep a running total of the things you know. You're 1 point winning. Winning at life. That is true. A pastor did say that was mocking the Holy Trinity. She couldn't have done that herself.
No.
She couldn't reach that herself.
At least without anybody seeing it.
She couldn't have got her arms
right.
around
Well, I suppose.
To claw yourself from the spine outwards across the back with a ski jacket on.
Real flexible.
Almost an impossibility. Yeah. So there has been a lot of activity down there that's been mean, been a little bit nasty, and she was physically assaulted. That's probably one of the most impressive physical assaulting of a team member, if you like, or an investigator I've seen in Minnesota and in this country. But yes, it did make you think twice. So never say, I wish I had some sort of paranormal contact. Never say, it never happens.
You hit it. Be careful what you wish for.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, we hit on a lot of good stuff. If you're interested in theaters and any of the tidbits information, should we push your book one more time? You write about all of these locations. I've
investigated extensively throughout the Midwest and Minnesota, all these historical buildings. We're having this conversation now because I'm a historian and I've researched all of the history. Yep. I've done investigations in these buildings, not just once, not just for a couple of hours. I mean, I've actually lived in these buildings to produce these books, and everything we've got here has come from historical research and personal experience.
So I suppose we should tell people, if they want to read your book, where can they pick it up?
They can find that everywhere. It's on Amazon, all good e-book shops. You can order that as well from your local bookshop. If you can't find it, you've only got yourself to blame. And if you want to leave me a good review, I would recommend that. If you're on Amazon and you've read the book and you want to say, good job, Adrian, I would recommend that. If you read the book and you don't like it, then obviously don't write anything at all, would be my advice. Well, all good things come to an end. So thank you for joining us on our episode on the Mounds Theatre. And don't forget to join us next time for more of the same. It just remains for me to say thank you for listening and be interested and interesting. Goodbye.